A deity that is often talked about or mentioned is also a deity that is quite rare to find in art, in Himalayan art, and that deity is the mother goddess Kali of the Hindu tradition. Now, Kali is really quite complicated because it has a number of different origin myths and it has a number of different source texts. Also, we have quite a variety of different iconographic forms for her depending on the literature that is describing her and her narratives. Primarily, Kali is, we can say, is a dynamic goddess. Her iconography is based on narrative stories, as opposed to Buddhist deities of the Buddhist Tantra, which are very static type figures, not based on narrative and not up for a lot of artistic interpretation. So for Kali, we don't have a lot of examples, very few on the Himalayan Art Resource website. I personally don't actually recall seeing a tremendous number of images of Kali in the Kathmandu Valley or in travels around Nepal. Possibly it's more common on the southern slopes heading down towards the Gangetic Plain, possibly. There are a number of very, very excellent PhD dissertations on Kali and her origins. But with Himalayan art, we really have three study topics that are important. And the first is the origins and sources for Kali. And then secondly, we have iconographic forms based on those sources. And the third, which is really the more interesting of all of the three topics, is conflations and confusions. Now, the conflations primarily have to do with the conflicting stories, the conflicting Hindu stories between Shiva, Vaishnava, and Shakta sources. And the different conflations, whether or not Kali is an emanation of Brahma, or whether she's an emanation of Vishnu, or whether she's an emanation of the of Shiva. So those are really conflations, and very much important to the overall subject. But then we have confusions, where we then have forms of Kali that are entering into Tantric Buddhism. And yes, we must admit that the Shri Devi of Tantric Buddhism has to be related to Kali, because even in many of the mantras, Sanskrit mantras in Tantric Buddhism, for Shri Devi, then the words Mahakali are actually present. So we must admit that this is the Shri Devi of Tantric Buddhism is a borrowing of the Kali Ma of the Shakta tradition and the general pan-Indian Hindu traditions. And there's many different forms. Sometimes people like to say there's 21 different forms of the Shri Devi in Tantric Buddhism. But I've seen some literature on this, and one of those forms is actually including the Sipe Gyalmo of the Bun religion. So I don't really quite trust it, or I don't trust the necessarily the history of this, especially since personally I have counted more than 21 forms of Shri Devi in Tibetan literature. So I don't know where these sort of ideas are coming from at this time. But back to the point here, Kali is not well represented in Himalayan or Tibetan art, the Hindu Kali, and the three study topics are origins and sources, iconographic forms, and lastly, conflations and confusions. So you can press like, you can join, you can subscribe, you can join HAR on Patreon, and you can make a donation on the homepage of Himalayan Art Resources.